The first blow caught her across the back of the head before she heard anyone coming. She hit the corridor wall with her shoulder and went down hard onto the concrete floor of Chino Federal Correctional Institution. And before she could get her hands under her to push back up, two more bodies were on her knees. Wait, the specific calculated violence of people who have decided this is happening and have no reason to stop. The corridor was empty because corridors in federal facilities are empty at the right times when someone wants them to be. She had been there 4 months, and she already understood that the geography of a place like this is social before it is physical. Who controls which spaces, which hours, which silences? She covered her head, took 3 more hits to her ribs and her forearms, heard something they said in Korean and understood about half of it, which was half more than they expected her to understand, and the word she caught, the name she caught, made her go still for 1 fraction of a second in a way that had nothing to do with the pain. The name was Sungjin. Guards came, eventually, the way guards come when something has already finished. She was helped to the medical unit. She sat on the examination table while a nurse documented the bruising on her ribs and her arms and the laceration above her left ear that would leave a small scar she would carry for the rest of her life. She answered the questions asked of her. She did not name anyone, not because she was afraid, because she was thinking. Thinking very hard and very clearly about the fact that a man who she had given everything to, who she had protected, who she had handed 3 years of her life to, had just sent a message to her inside a federal prison. He was not afraid of her. That was the message. He was comfortable. He had moved on. He had built something and married someone and occupied the world she had cleared the space for him to occupy, and whatever small part of him had registered her existence in the last 4 months had registered it as a loose end worth managing rather than a person worth respecting. She sat on that examination table with blood drying above her ear, and her ribs burning every time she breathed, and she made a decision that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with clarity. She was going to get out of this place. She was going to take every year of what came next and use it the way she knew how to use things, with precision, with patience, and with the full understanding of someone who had been underestimated so completely that the underestimation itself had become her greatest advantage. And when she was done, Sungjin-oh was going to understand what he had actually done, not just to her, to himself. Stay with me, because this story starts in that corridor, but it ends somewhere he never saw coming, and neither did anyone else. Before we go forward, you need to understand what Aaliyah Carter gave up to put herself in that corridor, because the sacrifice is the whole story. Everything else, the company, the money, the legal twist, the moment he had to stand in front of 2,000 people and tell the truth, all of it only matters because of what she chose to give away and who she chose to give it for. Aaliyah Carter grew up in Inglewood, California, the eldest daughter of a high school music teacher and a woman who ran her own catering business from a commercial kitchen she rented on weekday evenings. She was the first in her family to finish a 4-year degree, the first to land a corporate job, and the first to build a professional reputation in Silicon Valley, a world that was not designed with her in mind, and had made that clear to her in 100 small ways before she was 25, and in a few large ways after. She met Sungjin-oh at a startup accelerator event in San Francisco when she was 25, and he was 30. She was presenting a business concept she had been developing for 2 years, a logistics optimization platform designed to help small businesses in African diaspora communities access international supply chains that had historically been built around larger players and had systematically excluded them. The concept was not just good. It was the kind of good that seems obvious in retrospect, the kind that makes you wonder why nobody had solved it before, and the answer to that question is always the same. Nobody had solved it because the people who would benefit from it were not the people who usually got to sit in the room where solutions were funded. Sungjin listened to her present it with the focused attention of someone who recognizes the real thing when he encounters it. He had been in Silicon Valley for 8 years, had 1 failed venture behind him, and had spent those 8 years developing the specific instinct of a builder, not for market sizing or exit multiples, but for the genuine article, The idea that is solving a real problem in a way nobody has solved it yet. He knew what that felt like when he heard it. He heard it when Aaliyah spoke. They talked for 2 hours after the presentation. He asked her how she had thought about the model, which was the question nobody else had asked, because everyone else was asking how fast it could scale. That question, the how, not the how fast, made her trust him. It was the first indication that he might be someone who cared about the thing itself rather than just what the thing could become. She was wrong about what that meant, ultimately. But she was not wrong about the question. He had asked it genuinely. In the beginning, everything about him was genuine. They started working together, then building together. Then, because these things happen between people who spend enough time in the same room solving the same problems with the same intensity, they started being together. For 2 years, the partnership was both professional and personal, each dimension reinforcing the other, each one convincing her that the investment she was making in him was safe because he was invested equally in her. She was not naive. She was not swept away by romance into a bad decision she should have seen coming. She made a deliberate choice about a person based on 2 years of evidence that he was who he appeared to be. The evidence was, for 2 years, accurate. And then it stopped being accurate all at once, on a Tuesday in March, when the federal investigation opened. The fraud was not Aaliyah's idea. It was not her decision. It was not a plan they had made together. Sung-jin had, without telling her, altered the revenue projections in a funding application, inflated numbers in documents that carried both their names because the business was jointly registered, because the email account used in the submission was shared, because the paper trail of 2 people building something together does not naturally separate itself into clean individual responsibility until something goes wrong, and the separation suddenly becomes the entire point. When the investigation opened, it found exactly what it was looking for and more: a trail of shared documentation, shared accounts, shared correspondence that made the question of individual culpability genuinely complicated. Prosecutors were prepared to charge both of them. The evidence was sufficient to move in either direction, and the direction they moved would depend largely on what each party said and how cooperative each party was willing to be. Sung-jin came to Aaliyah 3 days after the investigation opened. He was composed. He had already spoken to lawyers. He had already run the numbers on what the different outcomes looked like. And he presented her with an argument that she would spend 3 years examining from every angle, trying to understand how she had found it persuasive. He said if they both went down, everything ended. The work, the platform, the mission, the thing they had spent 2 years building. He said the company could survive one person taking the fall, but not 2. He said the evidence pointed more naturally toward her access to the shared account, not because she had done anything, but because her fingerprints were on more of the administrative infrastructure, and a skilled defense for him could reasonably argue that he had not been aware of the specific transaction. He said if she accepted responsibility, he would keep the company alive, take care of her financially during the sentence, and be there waiting when she came out. He said they would pick up exactly where they left off. He said the company would belong to both of them. He said he loved her. She was 27. She had spent 2 years building something she believed in with someone she believed in. She looked at what he was offering, and she made the calculation that love sometimes makes you make. The calculation where you put the other person's survival above your own because you believe the survival is shared. She agreed. She pled guilty. She stood in a courtroom and said words that were not entirely true and accepted a sentence of 3 years and 8 months because she had decided that protecting him was the same as protecting everything. It was not. She understood that within 6 months. The first letter that did not arrive. The first call that went unanswered. The first time she saw his name in a news article, not connected to a legal matter, but connected to a funding announcement, a new investor, a company restructuring that had placed the whole enterprise under his sole ownership, while she was sitting in a cell in Chino learning what concrete floors feel like in winter. And then, 4 months in, the corridor. The 3 women. The message delivered in the particular language of a man who had decided she was a risk and was managing the risk. She got off the examination table. She walked back to her cell. She sat on the edge of her bunk in the dark and understood, with the total and irreversible clarity of someone who has had every illusion removed at once, that she was alone. That she had been alone since the moment she said those words in the courtroom. That the person she had protected had not been protecting her back, had never intended to, and that the 3 years stretching ahead of her were entirely hers to carry. She decided, in that specific darkness, to carry them as something other than a victim. She had a mind. She had time. She had the thing that nobody could take from her because it existed inside her and had no form that could be seized, the full and complete knowledge of the concept she had originated, the work she had done, the thinking that had produced the platform that was now being built without her into something that would make him very, very rich. She started writing it all down the next morning. Every design decision, every conversation, every iteration, every version of the model that she had driven and he had responded to. Not because she had a plan yet, because documentation is the habit of someone who has learned that your own record of what happened is the only one you can fully trust. Here is what Sung Jin-oh did not understand about Aaliyah Carter. He thought prison would diminish her. He thought 3 years of concrete and fluorescent light and institutional food would wear down the thing in her that had built the concept he was living off. He was wrong. Prison did not diminish her. It concentrated her. And concentrated Aaliyah was something he had no framework for. She worked. Every day, in every available hour, she worked. She took every educational course the facility offered. She corresponded with researchers and economists and development practitioners working on the exact problem her platform had been built to solve, writing letters that were careful and precise. And because she was who she was, often more rigorous than the academic papers they cited. She built a network through the postal system that most people would not have been able to build through a conference. She studied law, not to become a lawyer, but to understand the specific architecture of intellectual property, the specific language of ownership, the specific mechanisms by which ideas become legally recognized property, and the specific protections that attach to documentation of origination. She did not do this because she had a plan. She did it because she had always been a person who understood systems, and the system she was now inside, the legal and commercial infrastructure that governed what belonged to whom and why, was the one she needed to understand completely. She also survived. This is worth saying plainly because survival in that environment is not passive. After the corridor attack, she made specific decisions about her daily existence that required a level of tactical intelligence that most people never have to deploy. She identified the social architecture of the facility, who held influence, what the actual rules were beneath the official ones, where safety came from and how it was maintained, and she navigated it with the same precision she brought to everything else. There were no more attacks, not because the threat went away, but because she had made herself someone who was costly to target again. She did not do this through aggression. She did it through the deep understanding of systems that was simply the way her mind worked. Her mother came every month without exception. Her mother was the kind of woman who does not perform strength because it is simply the mode she operates in, built from 40 years of running a business, in a city that did not make running a business easy, and from raising a daughter alone after her husband left, and from the specific daily discipline of someone who gets up and does the work regardless of how the previous day went. She brought food when permitted, news from home, and the particular form of love that does not require language because its consistency over a lifetime has made it as present and certain as weather. She did not say she had warned Aaliyah about Sungjin. She had once, clearly, and she had meant it. But she did not visit her daughter in federal prison to be right. She visited to be present. Diana came in the 2nd year. She was a lawyer who worked with a legal advocacy organization that reviewed the cases of women who had taken plea deals under pressure. And when she reviewed Aaliyah's file, she found something that the original public defender had not thought to look for. She found the intellectual property filing. The original concept registration, submitted 4 years before the sentencing, with Aaliyah's name as sole inventor, predating every commercial development of the platform. She did not tell Aaliyah immediately. She spent 6 months verifying what it meant legally, building a framework around it, understanding the implications. Then she came to the facility on a Tuesday afternoon and sat across from Aaliyah in the visitation room and explained what she had found. Aaliyah listened without interrupting. When Diana finished, She asked 2 questions, one about the legal strength of the derivation argument, one about the timeline for potential action. Diana answered both. Then Aaliyah was quiet for a moment. Then she said she needed to finish the time she was serving before any action was taken. Not because she had to legally, but because she wanted to walk out of the building having completed the sentence rather than having escaped it. She wanted to be completely done with one thing before she started another. Diana said she understood. They agreed on the timing, and Aaliyah went back to her cell and continued the work she had been doing for 18 months, documenting, studying, preparing, now knowing exactly what it was building toward. She was sitting on a hard bench in a courthouse hallway on a Thursday morning when Diana placed the 47 pages in her lap. She had expected release papers. What she got was a document titled Notice of Asset Registration, Original Proprietorship Claim. And as she read through it, the full picture assembled itself with the specific weight of something that has been true for a long time and is only now being looked at directly. Everything Sung-Jin had built, the company, the portfolio, the brand, the deals, the $430 million valuation that had put his face on the cover of 3 business magazines, all of it traced back to her patent filing, not inspired by it, derived from it in the precise legal sense. 3 core revenue streams, all launched in the first year after he restructured sole ownership, were direct operational implementations of specific frameworks she had documented and registered before any of it existed. Every dollar generated by those streams had been generated using intellectual property that belonged to her, and for which she had never been compensated. 3 years of revenue, 3 years of his story, 3 years of magazine covers and conference keynotes, and the wedding reception where he had told the story of building from scratch to the family of the woman he had married 11 months after she walked into prison. He had not just betrayed her. He had been living off her sacrifice every single day since. She read the last page. She set the document down on her lap. She looked at the wall across from her for 11 minutes while the clerk processed her paperwork. She did not think about anger. She thought about architecture, about how you build something that cannot be escaped through money or messaging or a well-prepared communications response. About what it would take to make the public record reflect what had actually happened. About the specific place and the specific moment in which that correction needed to occur. The clerk called her name. The courthouse doors opened. She walked out into the California sun with the 47 pages under her arm and her mother beside her and Diana on her other side, and she did not look back at the building. She was already thinking about what came next. She did not move immediately. This was the part of Aaliyah that Sung-Jin had never understood, her relationship with time. He operated in urgency. He was a man who moved fast, who decided fast, who had built his professional reputation partly on the speed and confidence of his responses. She operated in precision. She was willing to wait as long as the waiting was purposeful, and purposeful waiting looked, from the outside, like stillness. He had always mistaken her stillness for passivity. He was about to understand the difference. She spent the first 3 days at her mother's house in Inglewood doing nothing strategic. She slept. She ate. She sat in the backyard in the afternoon light and let herself be a person before she became a plan. Then she called Diana, and they spent 4 hours going through the complete picture. The IP filing, the derivation analysis, the forensic accountant's work on 3 years of revenue tied to her frameworks, the legal pathways, and the specific condition that Aaliyah had decided was the non-negotiable piece. The financial settlement was necessary. She needed to be compensated for what had been taken. But it was not sufficient. A check from Sung-Jin's lawyers, paid quietly, would resolve the legal matter and leave the public record unchanged, leave the magazine profiles intact, leave the conference speeches intact, leave the story he had been telling about himself standing without a correction. The people who had celebrated him for 3 years would go on celebrating him. The industry that had made him a symbol of something would continue to make him that symbol. And Aaliyah Carter would have been compensated for what was taken, which was not the same as having what was taken returned. What she wanted was the true version of the story told in the same rooms where the false version had been told. By him, in his own voice, with her name said out loud in front of people who had never heard it. She built the case the way she built everything, methodically, comprehensively, without any unnecessary move. Diana filed the intellectual property claim on a date that had been chosen carefully. The Innovation Summit, the largest gathering of the startup and technology investment community on the West Coast, the event at which Sung-Jin Oh was scheduled to deliver the keynote address to 2,000 people, was 12 days away. The filing was public record the moment it was submitted. Diana had briefed a journalist at a major business publication 48 hours before Sung-Jin's legal team could prepare a full response. The article published on a Wednesday morning. By Thursday, the business world was having a conversation that Sung-Jin's communications team was entirely unprepared for. And this is where the pressure becomes something different, because Sung-Jin was not just calculating legal exposure. He was calculating what it would cost him to stand on that stage, the stage he had built his whole identity around, and say the one thing that would dismantle everything he had presented himself as being. The calculation was more complicated than his lawyers understood, because it was not about money. It was about having to look at the room he had spent 15 years building a right to stand in, and telling the truth in it. His wife found out from the article. She was 29 years old, and she had married a man whose story she had believed because he told it well, and the article did not tell a different story about facts she had known. It told a story about facts she had not been given. She called her father. Her father called his lawyers. Her father was a man who had built a significant investment portfolio by being accurate about people, and he was now confronting the discomfort of having been inaccurate about one. The conversation between her father and Sung-Jin was reportedly the worst conversation of Sung-Jin's professional life, which was notable given the week he was having. The father-in-law told him the investment group would not remain associated with the public narrative that was developing, and that Sung-Jin needed to make a decision about what kind of person he was going to be, and that the decision had a deadline. Sung-Jin sent a message to Aaliyah directly, a personal message to a number he had held for 6 years. He said he needed to talk, not about the legal matter. As a person, she read it. She forwarded it to Diana. She did not respond. He sent a second message the following day. He said he had told himself for 3 years that he had intended to make it right, that the company's success had been built for both of them even if it was only under his name, that the situation was more complicated than it looked from the outside. Then he said he knew those were the stories a person tells themselves. He said he had been lying to himself and he knew it. He said he was sorry. She read this one too. She did not respond, not because she was punishing him with silence, because she had already processed everything she needed to process about Sung-Jin-Oh privately on her own time in the years she had been given to think about it. She did not need access to his current emotional state. She was not interested in managing his guilt. She was waiting for a decision. He could send apologies until the filing deadline passed. What she needed from him was a yes or a no. Diana's demand letter had arrived 2 days after the article. The financial terms were comprehensive: 3 years of licensing fees, an equity correction, a settlement number that his lawyers recognized immediately as entirely defensible in court and therefore entirely worth avoiding a trial over. And then the non-financial condition, the one that could not be settled with a check. Sung-Jin-Oh was to appear at the Innovation Summit as scheduled, deliver his keynote as scheduled, and in that keynote tell the true version of the story, not a managed partial disclosure, not a statement about learning from the past, but a complete, accurate, named account of what had actually happened. Who originated the concept? Who took the legal consequence? What he had built on the foundation of that consequence, what the record should reflect. His legal team said the financial terms were negotiable. They said the public statement condition was not acceptable. Diana said the public statement condition was not a negotiating point. They called back the following morning and said they needed more time. Diana said they had 5 days remaining. They called back on the 5th day. They proposed that the statement be pre-approved and crafted with communications professionals. Diana said no. She said Sung-Jin would write it himself. It would be reviewed for factual accuracy only, and he would deliver it in his own voice, without notes, to the 2,000 people who had been given a different version of events for 3 years. There was a long silence. Then the attorney said he would call back. He called back in 2 hours. The answer was yes. The Innovation Summit was held at a convention center in San Francisco on a Thursday in October. 2,000 people, every significant name in the West Coast startup and investment ecosystem. Cameras, a live stream that reached several thousand more. The kind of room that takes a story and amplifies it in every direction at once. Aaliyah was in the building, not on stage, not in the front rows. At the back near an exit, in a seat that gave her a clear view of the podium and a clear path out if she needed it. Her mother was on her left. Diana was on her right. They were dressed to watch, not to be seen. They were there to witness something that Aaliyah had spent 3 years, 2 months, and 9 days working toward without knowing exactly what form it would take. Sungjin walked onto the stage to applause. He was 33 years old. He walked the way he had always walked, with the ease of someone who had spent years making himself at home in rooms that were designed to intimidate. He stood at the podium and looked out at 2,000 people who had followed his career, who had read the profiles, who knew the story. He took a breath. And then, he did not give the keynote he had prepared. He said he needed to start differently. He said before he talked about the company, about the work, about the things he had been invited there to discuss. He needed to tell them something he had not told anyone in this room before. He said it would not be comfortable. He said the discomfort did not excuse the fact that it should have been said years ago. He said a woman named Aaliyah Carter had originated the concept that the company was built on. He said her name clearly. He said she had developed the model, built the framework, filed the intellectual property, and that 2 years of her intellectual work was the foundation beneath everything his company had become. He said they had built together, and then something had gone wrong, and the something that went wrong was his fault. A decision he had made about a financial document that he had not told her about, that had opened a legal investigation, that had ultimately resulted in her absorbing the consequence while he absorbed the benefit. He said she had served 3 years in federal prison. He said he had launched a company during those 3 years and had not once, in any public context, said her name or acknowledged her contribution. He said he had told himself stories about why this was acceptable, and he had known for a long time that the stories were not true. He said the intellectual property of the company's foundational concept legally belonged to Aaliyah Carter. He said the financial claims had been settled. He said the company's ownership structure was being adjusted to reflect her contribution accurately and permanently. He said she was in this room, and he was not asking her for anything, not forgiveness, not acknowledgement, not the room's assessment of what he was doing by standing here and saying this. He was saying it because the public record had been wrong for 3 years, and he was the person who had made it wrong, and he was the person who had to correct it. He stepped back from the podium. He walked off the stage. He did not wait for a response. The room was not quiet. It was something more complicated than quiet, the sound of 2,000 people recalibrating simultaneously, the specific noise of a narrative being revised in real time by people who had invested in the old version of it. In the back of the room, Aaliyah sat very still. Her mother put her hand over hers. Diana said nothing. The moment did not need language. It had taken 3 years and 2 months and 9 days to arrive, and it was exactly what she had built it to be, not theatrical, not staged for drama, but true. Just simply and completely true, said out loud in the most visible room available, by the only person who could have said it in a way that mattered. She stood up. Her mother stood with her. Diana stood with her. The 3 women walked toward the exit without hurrying, without looking back at the stage, without stopping for the people who turned to watch them go. The doors opened. The San Francisco afternoon came in. Aaliyah stepped into it and kept walking. The legal settlement was finalized in the weeks that followed. The intellectual property was formally acknowledged as originating with Aaliyah Carter. The company's ownership structure was restructured to establish a founding equity stake that had never been granted, but was now being permanently recorded. Every relevant regulatory body, every public filing, every document that touched the company's origins now carried both names. The financial settlement covered 3 years of licensing fees and a separate payment that the lawyers called compensation for lost opportunity. Aaliyah called it the cost of what had actually happened. She accepted both. Sungjin's father-in-law divested his investment group's stake 6 weeks after the summit. This had been anticipated, and the company survived it because several investors who had been in the room that day, people who had watched Sungjin stand at the podium and make the choice he made, reached out within days. There is a kind of investor who is drawn to evidence of real accountability, because real accountability suggests a character capable of learning from mistakes in ways that tend to build durable things. The company did not collapse. It reorganized. It continued, under different conditions, with a different story attached to it, building toward something that at least had the advantage of being accurately described. Sungjin's marriage did not survive the first year. This was not something Aaliyah had sought or anticipated. It was the natural consequence of a truth becoming public that had been private for too long, settling its weight on a relationship that had been built without full information. She felt nothing particular about it. She had not spent her years in prison thinking about his personal life. She had thought about herself, about her work, about what she was going to build. She built it, 18 months after her release. Not the same platform, that had already been built by someone else using her ideas, and rebuilding it would have been backward rather than forward. What she built was the next version of the idea, the version she had been developing in her mind during 3 years of having nothing to do but think. A company called After, focused not on logistics optimization, but on economic infrastructure. The tools, the financial instruments, the supply chain access points that allowed small business owners in African diaspora communities to operate at the scale that their talent warranted, but that the system had historically prevented. She was asked in interviews whether the name was a reference to what she had been through. She always said no. She said it was about what you build when you have finished being preliminary. When you have done the thinking, absorbed the cost, understood the problem at its deepest level. After was not a statement about survival. It was a direction. It was where she was pointed. By the end of the second year, the company had 200 clients across 12 countries, a Series A funding round that was among the largest raised by a Black female founder in the previous fiscal year, and partnerships with 3 African development organizations that gave it reach into communities the traditional startup ecosystem had treated as invisible. In the third year, the platform was processing over $1 billion in annual transaction volume. In the fourth year, Aaliyah Carter was the one on the magazine cover, not the subject of a profile about what she had survived, the subject of a profile about what she was building and where it was going and what it meant for the infrastructure of global trade for the communities it was designed to serve. She was asked in that interview whether she felt vindicated. She thought about the word for a long moment. She said vindication implied that she had been waiting for the world to confirm something about herself. She said she had not been waiting. She had known what she was capable of for the entirety of the time other people were doubting it. The years in between had not created her capability. They had created her clarity. There was a difference, and the difference was everything. She was asked whether she had forgiven Sungjin Oh. She said that was a question about her interior life, and she was not going to answer it in an interview. She said what she would say publicly was that she did not carry him. She had set him down a long time ago, not because what he did was acceptable, but because carrying it required allocating weight to him that she needed for other things. She had too much to build to spend her energy on what had already been accounted for. She was asked what she would tell someone who had trusted the wrong person. She said the advice was not about trust. She said trust was not the mistake she had made. The mistake was allowing someone else to be the primary holder of her own story, allowing herself to be the supporting character in his narrative of the thing they had built together. She said you can love someone and still document everything. You can build with someone and still make sure your name is on what you originated. She said the belief that needing credit was the same as not trusting was exactly how people ended up where she had ended up. That belief was a trap. The trap was old, and it was specifically designed for women who confused not needing to prove themselves with not needing to protect themselves. They were different things. She had learned the difference at a cost she would not wish on anyone. She was saying it clearly so that whoever was listening might learn it cheaper. There is a scar above Aaliyah Carter's left ear. Small, faded now, visible only in certain light. She has never covered it. She has never been asked about it in an interview because the interviewers do not know to ask, and she has not offered the information. It is hers. It is the record of a specific Thursday night in the third month of her sentence, in a corridor in a federal facility in California, when three people delivered a message from a man who believed she was a problem that could be managed. She was not a problem that could be managed. She was a person who could wait. And patience, in the hands of someone who knows exactly what they are waiting for, is the most dangerous thing in the world. The company he built on her sacrifice legally belongs to her now. Her name is on the foundation. Her name is on the cover. Her name is in every document that traces the history of what was built, in the accurate version of that history that now exists as a permanent public record where the false version used to be. She did not destroy him. That was never the plan. Destruction requires sustained attention to another person, and she had other things to attend to. What she did was build something true on top of what he had built on top of her, something bigger, something realer, something that did not require a false story to hold it together because the true story was more than sufficient. She walked out of the courthouse on a Thursday morning. She walked out of the Innovation Summit on a Thursday evening. She launched after on a Thursday in March, because by then Thursdays had stopped being the day a certain thing had happened and had become something else, the day she kept choosing to move forward. She chose it every week. She is still choosing it. And everything she builds from here is hers, completely, undeniably, with her name on it from the first document to the last. The way it should have been from the beginning. The way it is now. The way it will stay. If this story held you from that first hit in the corridor all the way to this last line, subscribe right now and hit the bell so you never miss one. Drop a like if Aaliyah Carter deserved every single thing she built and more.